Episode 242, Work-Life Balance. This is the Change Underground for the week ending 4th of January 2021. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the phrase work-life balance would not have made any sense. Life was, in some sense, work, particularly for the 98% of the medieval population engaged in agriculture. In some ways, we've been given a glimpse of this life during 2020. From the arbitrary lockdown in places like India, where day labourers were unable to return to their villages from the cities, with many attempting to walk, spreading virus and or dying along the way, to the work-from-home Zoom generations. I mean no disrespect for the Indian decision. A billion people and a rampant novel virus is never a good combination, and I suspect that there'd be unintended consequences from any decision. The large-scale purchasing of seeds during 2020 points to a more agricultural rhythm imposed upon people who have never lived this life choice before. For many of us living, in inverted commas, out of town, as they say, not much has changed, and we live out of town for good reasons. Lack of bustle, traffic and hubbub being high on my list. The ability to grow our own or a large part of our own food is another. The cycle of the year too is an important factor. I hope the newly minted veggie growers are coming to an understanding of the wheel of the year. Some had a fairly steep learning curve. Back in March I visited a local rural supplies shop in town to pick up some pea and swede seeds. Remember, March is autumn here in Tasmania, and I was looking for winter crops. Talking to the owner, he mentioned he'd had a run on sweet corn seeds, which was a bit of a head-scratcher, given we can and usually do cop at least one frost in the winter down to sea level. The thing is, though, people were showing their willingness to grow some of their own food, even if, given the interwebs and all, they had a gap in their applicable knowledge. The thing with growing food is the connection with the seasons, the turning of the wheel of the year. We're at 345 metres above sea level here, which is around 1130 feet in the old money, and we receive a healthy number of frosts during the year. A drought year brings more, generally less cloud cover, than a wet year. The leaf drop in the small orchard marks the end of our summer. The bareness of the tree limbs with the sun rising to the north of our orchard, when I look out the kitchen window, also reminds me of the wheel of the year. As the winter rolls on and the sunrise moves towards the equator before standing still for a couple of days, or at least appearing to, and then beginning the long journey back to the south of the orchard. At 41 degrees south of the equator, and therefore in the roaring 40s, this variation is quite obvious. Leaf fall is the sign to plant the garlic. It goes into the beds where I've grown buckwheat, more of that later. This wonderful plant sucks nutrients to itself and makes them available to the next crop. Beautiful flowers and heart-shaped leaves are a joy to watch growing. And incidentally, this crop has nothing to do with wheat or any of the other fertile crescent grains. It is gluten-free and extremely frost-sensitive. The rule of thumb I'm using is this: If it is a frost-sensitive grain, it's probably gluten-free. Things like maize, buckwheat, sorghum and rice spring to mind. I may be wrong, but the rule seems to hold for the moment. Each season, on the wheel of the year, brings its own tasks. Winter means trimming the raspberries to about 4 foot or 120 centimetres tall and removing last year's fruiting canes. It means preparing the duck house for the broody period that will come in spring. So this involves clearing out the deep litter and spreading it on the garden beds, then liming the floor of the duck house, spreading straw, cleaning the waters and grain containers, and after that last year's ducklings are big enough to move in. The duck houses are connected to 3 different runs, so the ducks rotate across these. This coming winter I will be planting fruit trees into these 3 runs that will both feed us and the ducks. Pruning fruit trees begins in about August as the colder weather begins to bite. I take cuttings as I prune, dipping the root end of the cuttings in raw local honey to promote growth. There is something special about raw honey that I'm not sure science has yet to fully describe. I've also used it on an open wound the vet left after a goat had to have her quarter removed because of mastitis. And so we flushed the wound every day and then rubbed on some raw honey. And it was the quickest, cleanest recovery from surgery I've ever seen in any animal. Through winter, these tasks continue until finished. The garden beds, once topped up with duck bedding, are planted to broadbeans. I use the dwarf Egyptian variety as they better withstand the trade winds that come with living in this latitude. These are then slashed when they are in full bloom in early spring and left to rot on top of the beds as an extra layer of mulch. Spring is never really that warm here, so things like vines, pumpkins, squash, etc. and sweet corn I leave until the start of summer. Brassicas and things like cabbage and bok choy and whatnot can go in whenever. And the start of summer here is the 1st of December. This past summer has been fairly cool too, but a large patch of broadbeans are up, the buckwheat is powering away, and the sweet corn is growing slowly. There is little to do with these crops once they're in, but let them grow. Maybe some watering if the things are dry. Once they're in and up, focus turns to raspberry picking. The ducks are sitting on eggs by this stage, but they're hopeless mothers. So a day after the eggs have hatched, I grab the ducklings and move them to an enclosed area in the shed with a heat lamp. And they grow quickly, and they move from a little plastic tub to a larger wooden area to where they are now, and the first batch of them, which is 18, are in an enclosure that's 2 pallets long by 1 shipping pallet wide. These pallets are given away free at a major hardware supplier in town. And so from this area, which is given new bedding each day, they will move on to the clean duck houses I mentioned above. We will eventually have 3 of these duck houses with their associated runs, because we can sell 20 dozen eggs a week without the overly bureaucratic requirements and more particularly costs that kick in once you get above 20 dozen a week. In the second half or thereabouts of January, the garlic harvest starts, so not long now. Then the blackberries that grow wild along the train tracks forming our eastern border will be ripe, and at about the same time we'll be picking apples. They come in a regular fashion, one tree after another. We preserve them as pulp, as apple cakes, as apple jelly, and of course eat an enormous amount fresh. We fit the bean slashing and the sweet corn harvest throughout this time too. Finally, when all of these harvests are in, it brings us back to leaf drop. So as you can see, there's a rhythm to the year. Despite everything else that is going on in the world outside our fences, the year rolls on inside them. It is for this reason, amongst others, that I think we all need to grow something. A small, no-dig veggie garden, a dwarf fruit tree or 2, maybe some soft fruit, like blueberries or raspberries or wouldn't go blackberries. Strawberries are good. And so on, and maybe a couple of chooks or ducks would replicate the wheel of the year without tying anyone down to dawn to dusk tasks. The idea is not to have people wed to the soil, but to have a way of supporting themselves and reconnecting with the cycles without overdoing it so that they've still got time for other things to do. And it is possible to do. And the more of us who do it, the gentler I believe the world will become. In fact, I live for a time when the growers of food are more admired than vacuous celebrity types who provide nothing but envy, dissension and mindless consumption. But that's me. And that's the problem with having the heart and mind of a poet in a time when the word citizen has been replaced with the term consumer. So let's encourage through our examples the wonder that is a freshly pulled carrot, a ripe crisp apple, or an egg so yellow and bright we reach for sunglasses. And while we and others are growing our food in our no-dig gardens, we will be decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week.